Hello there and welcome to Marking the Role, a podcast for teachers. We're based in the 𝗙𝗲𝗯𝗃 area of Australia on the east coast, but we're really for teachers all over Australia and even the world. My name is 𝗙𝗲𝗃𝗃, I'm your host, and today we are looking at the New South Wales state election. Now, I know that people from other states, teachers from other states, will be saying, this is not relevant to us. Well, I think you'll find that it is, because whatever happens in New South Wales over the next couple of weeks could also happen with any state in Australia. Now, for this particular episode, I've asked all of the leading contenders for interviews. I've asked Sarah Mitchell from the Liberal National Party for an interview several times. I'd say about 7 times, and I have sent her the questions. No response. I've asked 𝗏𝗏𝗃𝗏, the Shadow Minister for Education in New South Wales, for an interview the same amount of times, and I've sent her the same questions. No response. Now, I managed to ask, a friend of mine has a daughter who works in a state parliament, not New South Wales, and I asked her why this would be. There's absolutely no response. And the answer was fairly enlightening. The answer was because the listeners to this podcast know a lot more about the education system than any politician would. And any mistake or any light answer will be certainly understood by that group, the listeners, and they would sound silly. So, while it's okay for them to go on Channel 9, Channel 7, Channel 10, even go on the ABC and talk generally about education, they won't talk on programs or podcasts where the listener, i.e. you, know more about the topic than they do, because they'll end up looking silly. So, I had no response from the Liberal National Party in Sarah Mitchell. I had no response from 𝗏𝗏𝗃𝗏 or Chris Minns. I did have response from the Public Education Party. This party is fairly newly set up, operates with candidates in New South Wales at the moment, but will be looking to have candidates Australia-wide in different state elections and probably federal elections in the future. It certainly has the interests of public education at heart, and the wonderful thing is these are not career bureaucrats. These are teachers. These are people with skin in the game who understand what is happening in education. So I have managed to speak to Cheryl McBride, one of the candidates for the Public Education Party. But before we get into that interview, it is the day when the Sydney Morning Herald have come out with a story that more principals and teachers are being abused by students and by parents. It found that New South Wales principals were receiving threats of violence, but the actual violence against school principals has doubled, from 20% of principals who had experienced violence up to 43.9%. So things are looking pretty dire for New South Wales and indeed Australian education when principals are receiving threats and being at the end of abuse from students and parents. Now, it's not just principals, it's other teachers as well. And there was a Australian Catholic University investigator, Dr. Paul Kidson, who said that the increase in violence coincided with students returning to physical school after the pandemic. Well, you can't blame the pandemic on everything. You know, it might have had something to do with it, but really it is a breakdown in society that is at the core of it, especially when you have not just students, but you have parents abusing the principals and the teachers as well. So it's been a fairly busy week. And as I mentioned to my guest towards the end of the interview, I have heard on the grapevine that the idea of class action, with principals joining together to form class action against the New South Wales Department of Education for their lack of attention to the amount of abuse that principals are suffering. But now for the interview with the Public Education Party with Cheryl McBride. And I'm delighted to have Cheryl on this episode because, as you'll find out, she's a straight talker. And if she represents all of the candidates for the Public Education Party, then it's a great sigh of relief that people can actually speak and speak openly. Now, Cheryl admits that she's not the lead candidate. 𝗂𝗃𝗄𝗃 is the lead candidate, but cannot speak openly because he's still a headmaster employed by the New South Wales Department of Education. So I decided not to speak to him because he can't speak about the nitty-gritty and the detail. But Cheryl can. She's the number 2 candidate, and she's an ex-principal from the Department of Education. And I asked her, as I do with all my guests, to take us through her education and teaching history.
Sure. I think I was born into the golden era where children went to local public school and attended with the doctor's children, the greengrocer's children, everybody in our community, except for a few children who were Catholic, went to public schools. So I went to Beverly Hills North School as a young child, and then on to Beverly Hills Girls High School. And then finishing high school, I applied for and was awarded a teaching scholarship to a brand new, well, not at the time actually, to Sydney University. But then I had some friends who talked me into changing my scholarship to do primary teaching at 𝗏𝗏𝗃𝗃 College of Advanced Education, which is now, of course, the University of Western Sydney. So that was the beginning of my tertiary education. Then I went on to do a graduate diploma in remedial education, a master's degree in education, and then finally a law degree from Macquarie University. So I was definitely in the golden era where there were no HECS fees, in fact, supported by scholarship to get through my first part of university.
And how many years did you spend in the classroom? Teaching.
Nobody's asked me that for a long time. I'll have to work it out. I started when I was 20, and I was a principal when I was 33. So 13.
Right, okay.
13 years.
13. Yep, okay. So why has public education become so eroded over the past 20 years or so? I mean, I grew up in the same time as you did, I think, in that golden age.
We didn't know it then, did we?
No, we didn't know it yet then. But then I look back at my teachers. My music teacher was the great Richard Gill. And, you know, I had fantastic teachers. But what has changed to make this decline?
Look, there are so many levers, I think, that have added to it. But you've touched on one that I think is highly important, and that is the gradual erosion of attracting quality, intelligent people who've got, you know, good personal skills into teaching. It has become a profession of, you know, last choice in many ways. And I think when we were going through to get a college scholarship, you had to achieve, in the HSC, you had to achieve marks that were as good as anybody going into economics or commerce or I'm just trying to think of some of the other professions.
Or business or psychology, any of those, yes.
Yeah. So you had to be sort of, you know, performing in that higher level. And if you didn't get a scholarship, I just don't think you went. It just didn't happen.
No, I don't think you did.
And I'm even thinking of older, you know, people that I've worked with, you know, they were the top echelon of academic kids that went through school. And so, you know as well as I do that that, teaching requires not only, great relationship building with children, great rapport with children, but it also requires a high academic or intellectual level to be able to interpret curriculum, to apply it to the vast the vast variety of kids and their learning styles, their ability levels, etc. To be able to do that, you have to have a good intellect. And I think, we've gradually, the marks have become lower and lower and lower. And look, I don't want to be, a doomsday person, but that seems to be, there's a big group of people in that now. Thankfully, there are some great people too coming through, but they're people who have, an absolute vocation and love of children, etc. It's almost as if...
And they want to make a difference, don't they, Cheryl?
Yeah, absolutely. So I think that that gradual erosion of the high requirement for intellectual capacity has it's gone backwards.
So some universities have such a low ATAR of 50, 55
pathetic
that you think, good heavens, why haven't they put it up to 90 so that we can attract great teachers? But then the other thing is that people want good wages when they do go into it. Now, do you think salary has played a part in the decline?
Of course. Changes to superannuation as well, which goes in, I guess, that whole global aspect of salary. The superannuation scheme in the old days was very attractive. So that in the long term, teachers, could support themselves very well when they retired. We are, as a profession, if we're relying solely on our income, would be unable to live in many, many parts of Sydney. We just wouldn't be able to afford it. That's the end of the story. And young people are, they're working enormous hours that I don't think they've ever worked harder than they are now. But, for lesser reward in terms of real salary. And I think, your salary also reflects something of the value that society finds in you or the government finds in you. If you're...
Yeah, the respect.
Exactly, thank you. It's a respectful acknowledgement of the work that's required.
So we've got, so we're not producing graduates, we're not attracting quality students into education courses, into teacher training courses. The salary is not enough to attract top quality students. But what about the funding and resources? In other words, the government attention to schools?
Successive governments have eroded, the resourcing to schools, and, the media will tout on about, schools are better resources, more money in education than we've ever put in before, blah, blah, blah. But the bottom line is the dollar doesn't go as far. And the requirements now in terms of technology are huge for schools. So not just the actual, laptops and iPads, etc., but, internet connection. And there are any number of schools where internet connection is not up to scratch. It falls out. Teachers will be in the middle of a lesson. It falls out. It comes back, etc., etc.
So look, we've got these three things. Cheryl. We've got quality students. We've got salary. We've got resources in schools. How would the Public Education Party address those things?
Well, I think it's time that there was an educated, experienced school leader in the Parliament to actually negate some of the gobbledygook and nonsense that comes from some parliamentarians who are intent on praising the private independent system and denigrating the public system. We need somebody to combat that. I'm horrified by some of the statements that come out that actually reduce the confidence of parents and families and community about what we're teaching in schools.
So they confuse us with gobbledygook and catchphrases. They don't really know what they're talking about. They talk rubbish in many ways, and everyone nods their head and says, oh, yes, that's great. But no one really knows what's going on in the schools.
Correct. And, if we get our candidate up, He's a practicing principal and has worked in the bureaucracy and very experienced. So he knows things that most people don't.
He knows
and we
things. Good.
Yeah, we need somebody in there at estimates, budget estimates also, to hold the bureaucracy accountable, because sometimes they try to get away with, again, nonsense and gobbledygook about, for example, every class has a qualified teacher. Yeah, but the maths class over there's got an art teacher teaching them, or the science class has got a primary school teacher teaching them. Like subject specific. Let's get down to nitty gritty and really look at what is happening in the public system, compare it to the wealthy elite schools, expensive schools, who are investing money regularly so that they can supply a water polo pool or a grandstand in their sporting facilities. I mean, we're Australians, for God's sakes, and we've got some kids who have, next to nothing and are not being provided an equal platform through public education, which we have had in the past. It's just wrong, and we need someone to really focus on that, somebody with credibility, knowledge.
We'd need more than one person, wouldn't we? We'd need several people.
Oh my God, we'd love half a dozen. That would be great.
Yeah, exactly right. We've got to hold them to account.
We're all educators or parents or community members who've been concerned about this. Many of us have been advocates through our professional associations in the past, and nobody seems to be achieving a great deal in public education anywhere. So it's time.
Australia now is ranked in the last 4, I think, in the world when it comes to student behaviour. And student behaviour ranks above salary, according to our research, on why teachers in the public system are leaving the profession. So what could be done to address this thing like student behaviour?
Look, it's a really tough one, and I think society generally is looking at some of our kids with great disdain and disbelief that that they can display the behaviours that they do. But first of all, I'd like to say they are in the minority. But we do have children who have neurological disorders, etc., who are not receiving support. And that costs money. For goodness sake, our school counselling service is ridiculously thin. I've taught I remember one year when I was at a very hard school in a large public housing estate, and we couldn't attract a full-time counsellor. So we had 16 counsellors in 1 year. So you can imagine the lack of continuity, the lack of programming that went into those children, those most vulnerable children that needed it. So, and there are some kids who should not be in a mainstream class because they need specialist teaching. Some of them need to have small classes within a mainstream school. Some children with disabilities need a special school. It's not rocket science.
Cheryl, this is a point that this podcast has been on about several times. When I was at school and when I first started teaching, and perhaps you as well, we didn't have the extent of behaviour problems.
No.
Because a lot of these kids with neurological problems, with differences, were in special schools where they had special attention. And we didn't see it. But now, with the inclusion policies being so broad, that these students are in the mainstream classes and they are seen and they are disrupting other students' education. And sure, it's wonderful. Most disabled kids can be in a classroom, but some can't.
Absolutely.
Some simply can't. So would you be raising that as an issue if you get into the upper or the lower house?
Absolutely. Absolutely, and it's very high on the agenda. And I guess from a personal perspective, I'm a special educator, and that's my background. I taught children with disabilities for years when I was a young teacher, and then I've always had I've been principal at 4 large schools in Sydney Southwest, and we've always had special education units there. And look, I see that as the absolute premium for a child with disabilities, or for most children with disability. Huge advantage. So the last school I was at was Smithfield. We have 8 or 9 classes there for, this one class. Actually, there were 2 classes for children in kindy who had autism, not an intellectual disability, but autism. And those children, many of whom were very difficult to manage initially and had been difficult for mum and dad, came into our unit. They would be in a small class of 7 students with a special educator and a full-time school learning support officer. And then they would come into kindergarten for music and PE, and they would join us for all of those things. So by the time many of those kids were in year 2, we've gradually transitioned them into classes as they showed, aptitude for reading or maths or whatever else. By year 2, a lot of those kids were effectively included in the mainstream classroom and doing perfectly well. Now, how many kids don't get that opportunity?
But there'd be some kids who still weren't able to go back into the classroom and could be maintained in that special setting and have that special attention.
Correct. And look, it's not parents, you do have the occasional parent who just wants their child to be mainstream because, they're in denial about, whatever problem their kid has. And that's more the parent problem than the child problem. But you've got the large majority of parents who do have a child with, significant disability, who want them to be in a special school where they have all the resources, the hydrotherapy pools, they've got the specialist teachers, low numbers, they've got playgrounds that are safe for them, and we can't get them in because there's just not an opportunity there, and that is money. That is money. And it's a disgrace, an absolute disgrace. I do believe, inclusion's better. No, it's not. Not for a child with significant disabilities sitting at the back of a classroom with a teacher's aide or a school learning support officer, not engaging in the curriculum, not engaging with other children, not effectively being taught. That cheats that child, and that's unacceptable.
Wow, Cheryl McBride is a straight talker. How often do you hear politicians or bureaucrats speaking that directly? It's a breath of fresh air. We're going to have a brain break now, and the brain break is going to be from a band called the Waterrunners from the South Coast, from the Illawarra region. A bit of a favourite here on Marking the Role. We had them play in the first season and the third season. So, and here's the third track, and this is called Eureka, the Waterrunners.
I work for the Eureka mine, breaking stone for the South Coast Railway line. Give it all back if I could change that day. Working on top with a charge to blow, crew in the quarry working down below. All at once my world turned black, landed in the rubble flat on my back. Broken bodies, broken bones, everyone covered in dust and stone. I work for the Eureka mine, breaking stone for the South Coast line. I work for the Eureka mine, breaking stone for the South Coast line. 5 men killed and 6 men maimed, another died later in a world of pain. Sound of the blast heard round the town, wives and families started gathering round. Cannot forget that sight, scrambling through the rubble for signs of life. Can't forget forget those cries and moans for the sons and fathers not coming home. I work for the Eureka mine, breaking stone for the South Coastline. I work for the Eureka mine, breaking stone for the South Coastline. What have I done? I cried for your fathers and for your sons. If only I could turn back time, I would gladly trade their lives for mine. I won't go back to that Eureka mine. I'm gonna lay me down on the South Coastline. I won't go back to that Eureka mine. I'm gonna lay me down on the South Coastline. I work for the Eureka mine.
That was the Water Runners with their single Eureka. You can find them on Spotify or any of the streaming services. Just search for The Water Runners. Now we're back to the interview with Cheryl McBride, a candidate for the Public Education Party in the New South Wales state election. And if you're from interstate, the Public Education Party will also be trying to get candidates in nearly every state election, and no doubt they could look federally as well. Cheryl talks very straightforward, doesn't pull any punches, that's how it is, and it's great to hear that and not the weasel words often heard from the mouths of our leading politicians. Here's the rest of the interview with Cheryl McBride. Now, let's get down to the nitty-gritty here. You've got candidates in the upper and lower house. For listeners who might be nodding their head and saying, geez, they're straight talkers. Let's look at the lower house candidates first. And this is the tablecloth candidates.
No, other way around.
Other way around. Okay.
Yeah,
the tablecloth candidates in the very long bit of paper is the upper house.
Correct.
Okay. Who have we got?
We have 17 there. 𝗂𝗃𝗁𝗃 is our number one candidate. He's our greatest hope of getting into the upper house. As I mentioned before, long-term principal, worked in a number of different schools, worked in the bureaucracy, intellect unlimited, very, very articulate and capable. I'm number two candidate, Cheryl McBride, also. We've heard a bit about my background. So I've been around for a long time and taught for a long time in different schools. All my career in the disadvantaged areas. We have a number of other candidates who are teachers, ex-principals, again, knowledgeable people, teachers, and of course we've got some community members who've been strongly associated with schools for a long period of time.
Okay. To vote for the party, you wouldn't actually list and put the numbers, 1 to 20 down, 1 to 17. You just put a number 1 in that tablecloth box.
Just number one above the line. It's really simple. Put it in the box. You're done. But we're leaving it to people if they want to vote. Elsewhere, number 2, 3, whatever. That's up to them. But we are asking them to vote number 1 above the line for Public Education Party. Yes.
What about then in the lower house?
In the lower house, in the Legislative Assembly, we have 8 candidates, and some of them are out in the country. So we've got Northern Tablelands, we've got Barwon, we've got Wagga, we've got Orange.
Now, Wagga is a real problem area for education, so that would be a very strong vote, wouldn't it, for the Public Education Party there?
I think so, and we're hoping so. And obviously a lot of parents and community members are looking, at what's been happening in the country with, some of the schools that have been amalgamated, etc., that have not been successful. There's been enrolment flight to the private system. So, yes, those country areas are very important to us. And we've got, we've got candidates who are educators in those areas.
Yep. So that's in the lower house, you've got mainly regional areas. Would that be right to say?
We've got 4 regional areas and 4 metropolitan areas. Yes. So in the country, we've got Murray, Orange, Wagga, Northern Tablelands and Barwon. And then in Metrop Sydney, we have Balmain, Bankstown and Fairfield.
Okay, so Balmain, Bankstown and Fairfield, all of those, you think would be very highly considerate of public education.
Yep.
So again, that would be a matter of just putting their public education candidate as number 1.
That's right. Yes, just one above the line.
Okay.
Yeah.
Now, for those listeners from Queensland, from interstate, from all the other states in Australia, the Public Education Party will be going to other states for their state elections in the future. Would that be right, Cheryl?
Look, that's a dream and a vision. We've only really, we've been operating as an entity, if you like, for about 3 years to get ourselves to this stage where we've got registration, etc., in New South Wales. If we are successful, of course, we would love to spread across the country. It seems absolutely incongruous to us, even from an economic point of view, that we don't see public education as the foundation for, productivity, future contributing citizens, etc. It's in everyone's interest to have our children well educated.
Now, a couple of questions from listeners. This is a very detailed one, and this really does affect all of the country. Would the Public Education Party want to continue with the current full control that NESA has? Now, NESA, New South Wales Education Standards Authority, but NESA now has full control over teacher accreditation, professional development, and the certification of university courses. It's a pretty big responsibility. Now, to put those in the hands of one organisation, NESA, which I've got to be honest with you, Cheryl, we haven't had positive comments about NESA. Would you continue with that, or would there be an alternative?
We're probably not opposed to NESA, providing the people that are in control of it are actually well qualified. It has to have some responsibility, obviously, and it has to have some accountability, and it has to be controlled by practicing educators, and there has to be the proportion allocated to the public education system, because we still educate the vast number of children, and frankly, we educate the greater variety of children. Yeah.
The comment has been that NESA has been taken over by ideologues who push certain viewpoints, and that the diversity statements that NESA puts out and the department actually puts out, you think, wow, and people don't vote for this sort of stuff, but they suddenly find that, oh yes, this is important, and there's certain ideologues who push their point of view, and that's certainly getting on the goat of some teachers.
Absolutely.
Now, does the Public Education Party believe that critical race theory, gender theory and queer theory should be taught in New South Wales schools?
It's not an easy question to answer, because we actually do teach aspects of those theories already and have done for years. So if you think back to, a document called The Values We Teach, they were about, respectful relationships, honesty, etc., etc. So we do teach those things, but not under that umbrella and not to the extreme. But some of these other areas, they are the domain of family. And I think a quality educator, if a child, had some real questions about, their gender, their sexuality, etc. The quality teacher would either ring the parent and say, look, your child's asking these questions, or, go home and ask mum and dad about that. So
this is an issue, and I guess it's following on from World Pride Month in Sydney.
Yeah, well, I don't think it's up to a teacher to give their individual, as it is in, even talking about politics or anything else. It's not appropriate for a teacher to give their individual bias, or opinion in the classroom. That's crossing a line that should not be crossed.
Now, this is another question from a listener. Is the Public Education Party content with the New South Wales Department of Education bureaucracy and their oversight of New South Wales schools? Now, gee whiz, that's a biggie. You don't have to answer that, Cheryl, but
I'm actually okay with answering that, because I don't work for them anymore. If I still worked for them, they'd hit me around the head with the code of conduct in 5 seconds flat. And which is actually restricting our number one candidate, 𝗂𝗂𝗂𝗀𝗃, from speaking. I think it's absolutely appalling, that he is suppressed from making commentary about any not just this issue but many others. And so I'm very happy to be able to speak openly. So are teachers generally content with the bureaucracy? I think there are some people that they have a level of respect for, and I think there are a lot that they don't. And I think the general feeling of the teaching profession is that we want to be led by quality educators who have experience and knowledge of how to increase children's learning outcomes. We do not necessarily. There is a place for the bean counters and the finance people who respond to Treasury. Yes, there's a place for them, but not in the top leadership roles of the Department of Education. No, we want somebody who has knowledge, understanding, and is absolutely determined that our children will do better. And of course, frankly, we'd love them to advocate for resourcing in areas that we've just spoken about. And again, I go back to the golden era where we had, what were they then? Directors General, who were not tied by contract, who were not necessarily persuaded by partisan politics, but would stand up for the profession and stand up for children in public education. We've lost that, and that really, really is biting.
Well, standing up for public education rather than following an ideology. Public education and student outcomes have got to be at the forefront.
Absolutely. So why is our General Secretary, why does she not have, and the Deputy General Secretary, why is there not, KPIs based around children's learning outcomes?
Yeah.
It's ridiculous.
Yeah.
Absolutely ridiculous.
Yeah. And why has the person who wrote the behaviour policy never spent a minute in front of a class? And
help to contribute to some of those restrictive practices, help contribute to the denigration of behaviour in some schools, and the inability of a teacher who now feels like they can't intervene in a safety issue to prevent a child hurting another child or hurting the teacher, or demolishing property. In days gone by, we were taught how to restrain a child without hurting them, and I think that was entirely appropriate. A child should not be allowed to hit another child and hurt them.
No, nor hit a teacher.
And nor hit a teacher, mind you. Kindergarten first week, never ever not had bruises.
Look, and here's something that I heard on the grapevine the other day, that there is a class action being considered with school principals against the Department of Education because of their physical injuries. Now, that's a biggie.
That is a biggie, and it'll be interesting to see how they go.
Yeah.
Very interesting.
Now, I mean, we touched on teacher salaries before, but I had an email saying, okay, well, it's fine to say, oh, yes, we'll increase teacher salaries, but you would actually push for more money so that this could happen. I'm not across how this would be done, but is that the sort of thing that you'd do?
Yes, you would have to, access officials from Treasury, and just say, okay, what's possible? What can you free up? And, let's face it, at this stage of an election, there's money being promised left, right and centre for things that are not necessarily, the foundation of getting better learning outcomes for kids. So why would you not take, some money out of some of those projects and make sure that our profession, our very honourable profession, is well remunerated so that we have excellent outcomes for kids.
Yeah. Finally, Cheryl, what is your main message to the voters of New South Wales?
Well, our main message would be that we are looking for a better future for our children, that our children deserve a fair go, and that it is beyond time that we made sure that there were sufficient resources to support a world-class public education system.
Well, there you have it. Cheryl McBride from the Public Education Party, a small party that's trying to make big inroads into the New South Wales state election happening in about 6 days' time. And, this could well be the election where the smaller parties, the minor parties, really do get to have a say. It's been said that Mark Latham and the One Nation have been the kingmakers over the last couple of years. Well, there's more than just that party around now. Public Education Party, very much straight talkers, and I think that they would be doing a great job, really, for education and for New South Wales generally. You've been listening to Marking the Role, a podcast for teachers, for educators generally. We're based in Australia, but really for educators all over the world. And if you would like to make a donation to Marking the Role, because we're all run by volunteers and we do have expenses, you can go to Substack and just search for Marking the Role, ROLE. There you'll find our Substack presence. And you can become a subscriber or make a donation via Substack. You can also go to markingtherole.com.au and click on the little yellow coffee cup, and you can make a donation that way. And don't worry, if you subscribe or make a donation or even become a free subscriber, we don't say your name on the podcast or anywhere. So your anonymity is fully safe with us. My name's 𝗏𝗲𝗃. Thank you for listening. I'll see you again soon. And that was my dog Sausage just made that noise.